Well, I tell you what, if that doesn't get your blood pumping on a Friday, I don't know what will. You must not be an American if that doesn't get your blood flowing on a Friday afternoon. Welcome back to the Steve Finnegan Show. I am not Steve Finnegan. My name is Nick Horton, the founder and CEO of Opportunity Arkansas. Back with you. Glad to be back. I was supposed to be here yesterday. We had a little scheduling snafu, but it all worked out. So it's great to be here again. Had a lot of fun on Wednesday. A lot of great calls, a lot of great texts, a lot of great feedback, really, just about the show. And let's be honest, I mean, I had fun, and that's really the most important thing. So I'm glad to be back again today on a Friday. It's a little dreary outside. It wasn't like an hour ago, but now it is here in Little Rock. But we've got a great show. It is, of course, as I believe Steve regularly does now, it is Free Speech Friday. So if you want to be a part of the show, we would love to make that happen. You can do that by calling in, by texting. You can also send me a tweet. Some people call it X. I'm just not going to do that. I think I'm going to be the last person on earth to hold out. I refuse to call it X. It's Twitter. It will always be Twitter, as far as I'm concerned. Elon's good at some things. He's good at a lot of things. He's good at building rockets. He seems to be pretty good at finding waste in government. I think he missed one with the branding and the rebranding of Twitter, but that's okay. We still love Elon. So if you want to be a part of the show, 501-403-KARN, 501-403-5276. You can text, you can call, you can tweet me at NHHorton on the Twitter, and we'll get in as many of your comments as we can. It's Free Speech Friday, so John Luke, I don't know. I don't always get a chance to listen to Free Speech Friday. I'm not really sure how that works, but as far as I'm concerned, this is America, so it's Free Speech Friday. You just get to call in and talk about whatever you want to talk about, as long as the FCC says it's okay. So we'll be wise and prudent with that. But again, that number is 501-403-5276 if you want to be a part of the show on Free Speech Friday. We will get in as many of your comments as we can. However, I also want to let you know we've got a really jam-packed show. I spent some focused time over the last 48 hours lining up some really, really good guests. And I didn't quite plan it this way, but what I realized, even in the last hour, is that they're all actually focused and doing very, very deep quality work on education reform. And so we're going to kind of theme the show for today around that topic. And education, to me, is something, gosh, it's something I've always cared about. It's just something, even from a young age, that my parents were instilling in me the importance of having a good education, taking my schooling seriously. And they sacrificed a lot to make sure that happened. And then it's interesting, as you get older, you go through high school. I mean, I hated high school. I hated every minute of it. I loved college, but graduated with a lot of debt, a lot of student debt. Can I get an amen? There's a lot of us out there that can relate to that, unfortunately. So I was a little jaded, and I was homeschooled for a while. That's why I'm so smart, and have no social skills, is usually what I tell people. Just kidding. I love homeschoolers. Love homeschoolers. But I was homeschooled, and yeah, I learned from a young age the importance of education. But let me tell you, it changes dramatically. In fact, today at my kid's school, we had parent-teacher conferences. And it was a little surreal because I'm a young man. At least I think I am. And I've got a second grader and a kindergartner now. And so I'm sitting there listening to my son's second grade teacher talk about he's taking history and learning some government now. And one of his history words or lessons for this week was veto. I'm like, he's 8 years old. He's learning about vetoes. And he goes to a very competitive school, a very, very high caliber school. But I just said all that to say, when you become a parent, everything changes in general, right? But especially within the realm of education, your perspective about what you want for your kids. I understand so much more now the sacrifices that my parents were willing to make to get me a good education. And I have a lot of that same drive now for my kids, but it changes so much when you have two little ones that you're responsible for, and you want to make sure that they're fully and adequately prepared for the workforce and for adulthood. And so it's a very important topic, and I know for many of you, even if you're not a parent, you understand education, how important it is for the next generation of our state. So we've got some guests coming up. I said all that to say, it's a long lead-in to say, we've got 3 guests over the next 2 hours of our time here together that are in the trenches fighting for education reform, fighting to fix our broken schools, some of them here in Arkansas, some of them nationally and across the country. So at 4:35, we'll have our first guest. We're going to talk to Mr. Robert Enlow, who is the president and CEO of edChoice. If you haven't heard of edChoice, you need to know about them. They are one of the premier conservative organizations in the entire country. And they are doing incredible work, specifically within education reform and specifically within the school choice education freedom movement. They used to be called the Friedman Foundation. So many of you, I'm sure, have heard of Mr. Milton Friedman, Dr. Milton Friedman. And this is his organization that he was involved with starting and is now run by Mr. Robert Enlow. And they do tremendous, tremendous work. So we're going to talk to him at 4:35 about the landscape of education reform across the country and where Arkansas fits in that. We've done a lot of really good work. And you've heard me probably on Toby's show on Wednesday mornings, First News. We talk almost weekly about the LEARNS Act and education freedom and how that program is being implemented into our state and the success that we're already seeing from that. But we're going to talk to Mr. Robert Enlow about where Arkansas fits more in the national scene and just what we need to be thinking about next. What is the next wave of education reform in Arkansas? So we'll do that at 4:35. And then at 5:05, the top of the next hour, we're going to be talking to Mr. Hayden Dublois, who is a researcher with the Foundation for Government Accountability, but also a visiting economist at Opportunity Arkansas, my organization that I started just over 3 years ago. And we're going to talk to him about some brand new polling that's come out that we helped produce, where we went out and we talked to Arkansas parents about education freedom and about education reform. And it's one thing, it's one thing to just sit back and read the news and speculate and have our own opinions. But for us at Opportunity Arkansas, we want to know what the people of Arkansas think, because you're the ones that pay for all this stuff. And you're the voice that state government should be most responsive to. It doesn't always work that way. It often doesn't work that way, but that's the way it should work. And so we've got some brand new polling that we just got back, and we're going to talk to Mr. Hayden Dublois about that at 5:05. And then at 5:20, we're going to talk to Emmy Henley of the Reform Alliance. And this is an Arkansas focus group that works specifically with parents and helps them make informed decisions about education options. They've advocated for as many education options as possible here in the state of Arkansas. And then now that we have so many of these options, thankfully, Reform Alliance steps in and helps parents customize their child's education experience and figure out what option is best for them, and then helps them actually get into these programs and make sure that they're working for these families. So we're going to talk to Emmy Henley about that at 5:20. So I'm really excited. Got some really great guests. It's going to be a lot of good information about education reform and education freedom and what's happening in Arkansas, but also happening across the country. I do see we've got a caller on the line, but we got to get to a quick break. So, Bruce, if you'll hang on, we will get you in right after this. We'll be back on the Steve Finnegan Show. Welcome back to the Steve Finnegan Show. Nick Horton, founder and CEO of Opportunity Arkansas, filling in for Steve. Steve did want to let you know, by the way, wanted me to let all of you know that he's fine, and he will be back next week. His hip is fine. His health is fine. He just needed a little bit of time, as we all do from time to time, to recharge the batteries. So I don't know where he's at. I don't know what he's doing, but I hope he's got his feet up somewhere and he's relaxed, and he's going to come back fully recharged next week. It's First Amendment Friday. I've had multiple sources confirm. I apologize. It's not Free Speech Friday. It's First Amendment Friday. But in that spirit, we've got Bruce on the line from Hot Springs. Bruce, thanks so much for calling. Thanks for your patience. What's on your mind?
Nick, I appreciate what you and your organization does, educating us on all the things that go on in Arkansas politics. My question is, and you mentioned earlier that you've got small children and you're a youngster. I am at least twice as old as you and don't have any children in school any longer. But my whole life, politicians use education as a way to get my vote, because they come out and they say, we're going to fix the education system if you vote for me. And they never fix it. And we're still fighting it. And it'll still be fighting it even after you're my age. And my question is, this Arkansas Freedom Act that allows us, I believe, to take funds and use them for some alternative schooling, is that a way for us to finally make some inroads into getting our youngsters able to be contributing members to society when they become your age and eventually my age? Or is it another kick the can down the road, because the state legislators, I believe, are the ones that kind of dictate what is taught in the schools, and we can't seem to get past that. So it's a frustrating predicament that we're in. And I've asked some politicians that have come and talked to some service organizations that I'm a part of, if you want my vote for, and you talk about education, can you guarantee that the ACT score is going to raise by, 10% or 1% or any percent? And they smile and turn around and walk away because they don't have an answer for it. They can't. they want my vote to fix education, but they can't tell me how. They can't measure that and guarantee any kind of result on that.
Yeah.
So I'm just trying to figure out if this Education Freedom Act is going to be a way to get that fixed.
Yeah, it's a great question. I really appreciate the call, Bruce from Hot Springs. Thank you so much. And it's one of my favorite topics, so I'm glad you brought it up. We're going to be talking in the next segment with Mr. Robert Enlow from edChoice, and he's going to talk about that topic specifically. and we're going to dig really deep into that in the time that we have with him. But let me just address a couple things, because there's a lot there. We could spend the rest of the show, frankly, just unpacking everything that Bruce said. A great call, great question. Really appreciate you, and thanks for your kind words as well. Look, education freedom. This is, to me, this is the issue of our generation. And Arkansas, thank God, truly, we are on the front lines of this, because we really started. And again, Robert Enlow, we're going to talk about this at 4:35 when we come back. But Arkansas really was one of the first states that started this national snowball, this national tidal wave that we've now started to see, and with universal education freedom. In a nutshell, I'll give you my definition. I'll give you what I think makes that so powerful and significant, is that you are now in charge of your tax dollars to decide how you want to educate your kids. Now, Bruce mentioned, I believe, if I heard him correctly, he doesn't have kids, or doesn't have school-age kids at least, so it doesn't apply to him in the same way. But the context, the important part of this being, is that parents now hold the cards. And so if parents are not getting what they want, or what they want for their kids, and the results that they want for their kids, they can vote with their feet. And they can pick up and they can go to any other school in the state of Arkansas. Or they can homeschool, or they can join a micro school co-op, or they can go to a charter school. They can go anywhere that they want to go, and they can have some of their tax dollars back to keep in their pocket to decide how they want their kids to be educated. Now, how does that improve education? Because the left would say, and the naysayers, I don't think this was Bruce's intention, but the counter to that we always hear is, well, that's fine for the rich kids, or that's fine for the kids that live close to the private schools, or that's fine for you name it, but it doesn't help the kids in the public schools. But here's where they're wrong, is that it does. And we'll get into this in the next segment in more detail. But there has been study after study after study in states that have done versions of what we have now in Arkansas on a smaller scale through a voucher system, which is not exactly what we have here in Arkansas. What we have here in Arkansas is actually better than a voucher system, I would argue. But in those states, what they have seen consistently is that education outcomes have gone up across the board. And why is that? Well, let's think critically for just a second. Let's think analytically for just a second. Think about any other area of your life. Think about when you want to buy a car. If you don't like the car that you have, you can go get a different one. You can go trade it in. You can go to a different dealership. If you feel like you got a raw deal from the place you bought your car, you can go somewhere else. You can vote with your feet. And that's called a free market. That's called a free society. That's called competition. I mean, this audience, you know. That's how the real world works. But education hasn't worked that way. And so what happens in an actual market, when you have the ability to move and vote with your feet, is the old car dealership that you didn't like, you didn't get the results that you wanted, they got to get better, or they go out of business. But we haven't had that in education. Ever. You go to the school that you're zoned for. You go to the school that based on your zip code. And your zip code a lot of times is determined by your income. But we don't have that anymore in the state of Arkansas because of education freedom. Because now every single child in the state of Arkansas has equal access, has equal rights to that funding, and can vote with their feet. We finally have a level playing field for the first time. We're going to get a lot deeper into this, so I really appreciate the call. Nick Horton filling in for Steve on the Steve Finnegan Show. Stick around. We are just getting started. $4:35. Well, 4:36 now. As soon as I said that, clock changed. But 4:36 on a Friday afternoon, a First Amendment Friday here on the Steve Finnegan Show. I remember very fondly as a kid driving to school, listening to my dad with my dad to Paul Harvey in the mornings. Good morning, Americans. It's Friday, and I feel that right now at 4:36. It's going to be a good weekend. Hope you got some fun things planned with family. Hope you take some time off. Oh, listen, it's really difficult these days to just kind of unplug and shut out the noise. But as I get older, I find how I'm just constantly reminded how important that is. We had a caller in the last segment, Bruce from Hot Springs. I really appreciate his comments. And he asked essentially, hey, like this all really sounds good, education freedom, education reform, but every time an election rolls around, I hear from these legislators and these politicians who just tell me, like, we're going to fix education this time, and it just never quite seems to happen. And so we're going to dig into that a little bit more. And to do that, I'm very proud and privileged to introduce someone who's become a really dear friend, Mr. Robert Enlow, who's the president and CEO of edChoice. And I'm so glad, Robert, that you were able to join us. Are you there?
I am, and thanks for having me. And as Paul Harvey used to say, and now for the rest of the story.
That's right. That's right. We're gonna get the rest of the story. Robert, before we just jump right in, I'd love if you would just share with the audience just a little bit more about edChoice and the work that y'all do. Tell us about edChoice.
So I love that. Thanks so much, Nick. So edChoice is the legacy foundation of Milton and Rose Friedman. For those of you in your audience who may not know Milton Friedman, he was considered the best economist in the 20th century. He was the man who came up with the idea of school choice in 1955, and our organization was created very simply to advance that idea across America. So edChoice now does four things. We do research, we do training, we do advocacy, and we do litigation work. So, for example, in your neighbor next door, we're defending families against the Alabama High School Athletic Association, who's trying to stop families who are getting the Choose Act from playing sports.
Well, that's so important that y'all are engaging in that. And I wanted to get your thoughts, well, on a variety of things. We've got, about 8, 9, 10 minutes here before our next break. I think sometimes, Robert, for this audience especially, it's just we're all focused on Arkansas. Everybody's busy. Everybody's working. We've had just a very long road that we've hoed on education freedom to get to this point. Could you give us just a little bit of the national perspective of where does Arkansas stand in comparison to some of our neighboring states and really just across the country? I was telling folks in the last segment, hey guys, we really are at the top, and we really did help start this snowball that we've seen now across the country. But I think you're even more well positioned than I am to give some of that perspective.
Well, I love hearing that. So let me break it down in three chunks for you. So from 1996 to 2016, the first decade of edChoice's life, we saw there were only 6 programs when we started. And by the end of that tenure, there were 61 programs operating in America. So in 10 years, we created 61 school choice programs. And those programs were voucher programs, tax credit scholarship programs, direct tax credit programs, basically anything that can give families a chance to get more money back. And then in 2016, when we changed our name, we basically came up with the idea that we should only be supporting universal choice. Everyone should be free to choose with all the dollars. And so when we started that effort, there were 0 states in 2016 that had universal eligibility. There are now 19 states that have universal eligibility. And what's even more important, so let's think about it this way. So if America is now more of a country of choice and different options, and now we have 19 states that are doing universal eligibility, Arkansas is actually at the top of that heap because they do all three things which we care about. They let every kid choose, they let them choose all the options, and they give them dollars associated with those monies that is consistent and continual. And so that's why we rank Arkansas's LearnZ Act as number 2 in our Friedman Index.
Number 2. So we're number 2 in the entire country based on the Friedman Index. Is that right?
That is correct. Only Arizona and basically Florida, Arizona, and Arkansas are the top 3. There are really only 5 states that now have truly universal choice where every kid can choose every option with every dollar. And that's Florida, Arkansas, West Virginia, New Hampshire, and Arizona.
So, Robert, I don't really even know what my question is, maybe more of just a comment. I want to get your reaction to this. But the more I've studied this, the deeper we've seen this be implemented here in Arkansas, and we've started to see it change families' lives literally just overnight. We're out talking to families who will say, gosh, my kid hated going to school. They wouldn't get on the bus. They couldn't read. They didn't want to learn. And now they're waking up every day, grabbing their backpack and literally running to the bus stop because they love school, and that never would have been possible before. And you think about that. I mean, I'm a parent. There really is nothing. I mean, is there anything more American and basic than being able to decide how your child is educated? I mean, at some point, I mean, there's data, there's numbers, there's all these arguments out there, but at the end of the day, isn't this just very simple?
Well, it is very simple, but you got to remember, we as Americans have basically been given a government-run education for the last 150 to 200 years. So from the 1860s onward, we basically said, we should organize education in America basically based on where you live. It should be free at the point of delivery. It should be compulsory, and we're going to tell you that you have to go where you're told to go. And so when you do that, and if you consider that in every other business, you'd call that a monopoly. And
that's
so
right.
It is tremendously clear that the ability of families to choose is what families are asking for and what they want. That's why in America in the last 5 years, you've seen a 100% increase in the number of families taking these choice programs. And in 1 year, you saw a 25% increase. But more important, in a place like Arkansas, the number of families going on the LEARNS Act went up by 200% in just 1 year. So Arkansas is leading the way, and families are saying, it just makes sense for me to have more choice.
So we had this caller, and we're going to have to go to a break here in just a minute. Robert, I don't know if you can hang on until the top of the hour. I'd love to get you in for at least one more segment. But
sure.
We had this caller just before you came on, and he sort of presented this idea that, well, it sounds good, and I want to believe in it, and I want to believe that it's going to help, and I want to believe that it's going to improve education across the board. But, gosh, I'm just skeptical because I've been hearing that for 40 years, and things just never seem to get better. What's your reaction to that, Robert? How does education freedom in a program like this improve education across the board?
Well, so if you're narrowly discussing the idea, are kids doing better on tests, right? We know very clearly that around the country, kids in private schools are doing better on state tests than they are in their traditional schools. They're certainly doing better on NAEP as a whole. So if you're looking at wanting to make sure kids learn, they're going to send them to a different setting. But that's not all that we care about as taxpayers and families, right, as a parent. I want my kid to be a good child. I want them to be moral. I want them to be well-behaved. I want them to go to schools that are safe. I want them to go to schools where their kids don't get bullied, right? I want them to go to schools that will help them graduate and get into college at higher rates. The great data that we have about school choice is that all of those things, because of school choice, are improved when families get a choice. So if your child is in a non-public school or a school of choice, your child is showing that they love to learn. Your child is not getting bullied. They're in safer places. The public schools around them are doing better, and they're graduating from high school at higher rates. So this is all really, really good data and really, really good news, and it's what we want.
And the data also shows, Robert, because we mentioned this, and we got to go to a break here in just 30 seconds, but the data also shows, doesn't it, that states that have done this, they do see improvement across the board because parents can vote with their feet. And if they're not getting the results that they want in a public school or in a private school, they can pick up and go somewhere else. So schools now, there's actually a marketplace in the education system where schools have to perform.
There is nothing better for America than more choice and more opportunities and more options. That's the sort of story of America, and we should keep going with it. And now that education is having to experience it, it's getting better.
Okay, we're talking with Mr. Robert Enlow, the president and CEO of edChoice. and we're gonna keep him on. We're gonna come back for one more segment after the break. Stick with us. Nick Horton filling in for Steve Finnegan. We'll be right back. 4:50 on a Friday afternoon. Nick Horton of Opportunity Arkansas filling in for Steve Finnegan on the Steve Finnegan Show. It's First Amendment Friday, and we've been talking with Mr. Robert Enlow, President and CEO of edChoice, one of my favorite conservative national organizations that's working every single day to put parents in charge of their kids' education system, or their kids' education dollars, I should say. And, Robert, I want to get your thoughts on really two more things, things that have been in the news here, and I know they're not even really unique to Arkansas, unfortunately. And one is funding and one is regulatory creep. And we'll just start with regulatory creep. So we saw back in the session not just one bill, not just two bills, probably a dozen or more bills that we were tracking and analyzing and raising concerns about with legislators. Most of them were from Republican legislators, just so our audience knows, but not all of them. And a whole host of attacks on education freedom and education freedom families, that you should be subject to new auditing requirements, or private schools should be forced to pay for transportation costs, or all sorts, really anything that they could just throw against the wall to try to intimidate families. I know you mentioned what's happening in Alabama. On a broader scale here, why is this dangerous and against the spirit of education freedom, and what do we need to be on the lookout for going forward?
Well, I wish I could say Arkansas was an isolated case, but it's not true. The same things and same efforts happen in Arizona, Oklahoma, Texas, Utah, Indiana, and, of course, your state in Alabama. So the reality is when you get choice, people are starting to be afraid of how parents are going to actually utilize choices, right? So on one hand, you have folks to the left say, well, we don't like these anyway, so let's do a death by 1,000 cuts. So we got to question whether a parent can buy a Lego set, even though public schools buy $7,000 Lego sets for their classrooms, right? But a parent, of course, can't do that. And then we have folks on the right who are concerned, oh, my gosh, well, we can't let parents buy everything they want because maybe they won't use it for education. Ultimately, the question here is, do we trust parents to do what's in the best interest of their children? My answer to that is almost universally yes. And we've seen this in the programs around the country. You know, part of this is like a giant sledgehammer in search of attack. In Arizona, the state with the longest school choice ESA program, where it's very wide open, some people call it the Wild Wild West, their misuse of the ESA, which, by the way, that program's over $1 billion a year now, is less than 1% a year. Now, by comparison, the government-wide mispayment rate in Arizona, in the country, is like 4 to 5%. The SNAP overpayment rate in Arizona is around 15%, right? So if it's okay to overpay in government programs to the tune of 5 to 15%, but freak out when it's less than 1%, I think what we're really finding is people don't trust parents.
I wish that were not the case, Robert, but I feel like you're probably onto something there. I want to get your thoughts really quickly as well on funding, because we're hearing this more and more that, well, I mean, yeah, we created a universal program, and that's great, and we want it to be there for everyone that needs it, but, I mean, there's a lot of people, and there's a lot of kids, and, I mean, people seem to really want this thing, and so now, I mean, there's over 51,000 kids, and what are we going to do, and how are we going to find the money, and it's going to bankrupt us, and what are we going to do about that? What's the reality about how education freedom is funded, and what should policymakers and the public and others give us some, I guess, just a mental framework to think about this issue, because there's so much noise, there's so much fake news out there about how these programs are funded, and isn't it a good thing? Isn't it a good thing that families are lining up to get in this program?
It's a hugely important and good thing. So two things. Let's get some reality check here about how we fund education in America, right? So for your listeners, every state's a little bit different, but education is funded for public schools from three pots: from state dollars, from local property tax, and from federal dollars. Right? So in my home state, a third grader who lives in Indianapolis gets about $18,000 in all of that money. Right? So it's $18,000. Now that same child will go to a charter school. Now charter schools, they get a portion of the state funds and they get the federal funds, but they don't get any local funds. So that same child in Indiana that gets $18,000 to go to a private school, goes to a public school, it's around $9,000 to go to a charter school, $9,000 to $10,000, right? Now, let's go a step further. You get an ESA program, and that program is funded with state dollars only and not local dollars. And so what you're having is that same child in Indiana who got $18,000 to go to a public school, $9,000 to go to a charter school, gets about $6,000 to go to a private school. Why is that child worth $12,000 less? First of all, it's a huge moral issue, right? But second of all, in Arkansas, you're only spending 27% of what you would spend on the child in the public school. It's really important to remember how much money you're actually spending, which is not nearly as much as you would spend on kids in traditional schools. And so now the conversation that people have is like, oh my gosh, we're allowing kids in private schools already to go to get this money. And oftentimes that is an additional cost, but it's not a huge one compared to what the state would spend on the kids. Moreover, the more kids that switch from a public school ultimately to a non-public environment saves dollars. Every single one of them saves tons of dollars, right? And so what ends up happening is you find that in states like Arizona, people switch at high enough rates to cover all of the costs of the folks who are existing in private schools already. Now let's talk about that for 1 second. Why is it a problem to educate kids that are in existing private schools? We want higher quality education across the board. Private schools educate kids in the public interest. Our goal here is to make sure that all kids are educated to the best possible way. And if we have a problem with funding kids existing in private schools because we think they're rich, why are we okay with giving them tons more money in gated, segregated public schools to go to school? We seem to be okay with millionaires going to public schools at far higher rates, but
that's right.
If we give them $7,000 to go to a non-public setting.
That's right. Yep, and that is such and it goes into the regulatory conversation as well of, well, we're willing to spend millions of dollars a year on football stadiums all across the state of Arkansas and football helmets and scoreboards and everything else in the public school system. But God forbid an EFA family wants to spend a couple $100 on piano lessons, and all of a sudden people start having a meltdown, and there's such a double standard. And we're early in this. Just for folks listening, they understand, I think, but just as a reminder, we're 3 to 4 weeks into universal education freedom. We are very early into this journey, and so there's going to be a little bit of that educational, learning curve here to kind of frame our thinking and understand that this is good for families. That's the first thing. That's the most important, that we can't forget, that we're putting families in charge. But also, a lot of these things that the media and others want to trick us into freaking out about, this is happening on a broad scale in every other educational setting, but it's actually at a dramatically lower cost to taxpayers. So, Robert, we're out of time.
So hold on, one more thing. The average expenditure in Arkansas is $13,200 or
that's
so
right.
for a kid, but the scholarship program is $6,800. So
that's right.
That's something to remember.
Less than half. We got to go to a hard break, and we're back on the Steve Finnegan Show. Woo, that intro will get you if you're not paying attention. Welcome back. Nick Horton, founder and CEO of Opportunity Arkansas, filling in for Steve. Hey, it's Friday. We almost made it. 1 hour left, but we still got a long way to go here in the show. We got a full hour. We were talking in the last couple segments with Mr. Robert Enlow, the president and CEO of edChoice, and we had a great call from Bruce in Hot Springs about, education freedom. It sounds good, but does it work? And so the show today really has become, in a lot of ways, an Education Freedom Friday, in addition to First Amendment Friday. And in that spirit, in that vein, we're going to continue the conversation about education freedom with our next guest, who I'm very excited to welcome to the show, Mr. Hayden Dublois. He is the Data and Analytics Director at the Foundation for Government Accountability, and he is also a visiting economist for us at Opportunity Arkansas. Hayden, are you with us?
I am. Thanks for having me, Nick.
Hey, thanks for making time.
Of course.
Specifically wanted to bring you in to get your thoughts on some new polling that we have published at Opportunity Arkansas. And I know you are a data guy. You're doing polling and looking at data and polling results all over the country. And this one really, I think, is going to surprise some people. We haven't really, we put it on our website. So if you want to go see it, opportunityarkansas.org, you can see it there under our Next Gen page, where we publish all of our work on education reform and education freedom. But maybe we just start kind of high level. Hayden, would you tell us a little bit about who we talked to and the demographics of the focus group or the survey, and who we talked to in these conversations, and then let's dig into a little bit of the results.
Sure. So whenever we do a poll like this, we want to identify Arkansas likely voters and make sure that the sample we're calling matches the underlying demographics of the state. And so we ask questions about party affiliation and age and gender, and then weight the responses to make sure that the poll results are consistent with Arkansas's actual demographics. For this poll in particular, we also asked about whether or not individuals are parents of school-age children, because it's not only important to know what the average Arkansas voter feels about education freedom, but I think it's especially important to understand what parents feel about education freedom and education freedom accounts and how their attitudes have shifted over time towards these accounts. So that's sort of the baseline as to how we would approach a poll like this and how we looked at this poll. And, you know, it includes over 500 Arkansas voters, over half of whom are parents of school-age kids, and, you know, a mixed methodology. So that's typically how we do something like this to make sure the results are robust.
So we had over 500 respondents, and over half of them, as I believe I heard you correctly, were parents of school-age kids. And we dug into, in the survey, we talked about, we wanted to get their thoughts. Really, the purpose of the survey was to figure out what do parents think about education freedom and what do voters more broadly think about education freedom. What did we find? What did the people of Arkansas tell us?
So top line, two-thirds, or roughly two-thirds, 66% of voters across the board support education freedom in Arkansas. Only 21% are opposed. So in net terms, that's net 55% approval, which is pretty phenomenal, especially when you consider it's across the board politically. Majorities of Republicans, Democrats, and independents are in favor of education freedom. And when you dive in and look at it on, okay, well, how does that break down for parents of school-age children? The results are even stronger. It's 81% of parents of school-age children are supportive of education freedom. Only 9% are opposed. That's pretty astonishing in how the strength of that support and how it shifted. In 2023, we did a very similar poll, and at that time, 61% of parents supported education freedom. So in just about 2 years, that's a 20-point jump in favor of education freedom. And so the growing momentum of parents behind EFAs and education freedom more broadly is really noticeable in these results.
Yeah, I just want to hammer that point because I think that is, I think that is just really astonishing. There's not many issues. Well, number one, there's not many issues out there in general where you're going to find 81% support, right? You're talking about more than four out of 5 people agree that they support this policy, and in this case, education freedom specifically. But that number, again, just to reiterate this for folks, that has increased by 20 points in just the last 2 years. Now, Hayden, I know we didn't really dig into this a ton in the survey itself, but if based on your analysis and your understanding of this issue and what you see in other states across the country, because I know you work in other states as well, what do you suspect is driving that increase? Because that is really significant.
Well, I think there's a number of reasons, Nick. I think first it's that with the law being implemented now and more and more parents each year as it becomes universal benefiting from education freedom accounts, the concept of education freedom isn't hypothetical or theoretical. It's very real for many Arkansas families who are actually utilizing the program. And even if you're not utilizing it, maybe you know a friend or a neighbor or someone at church who is taking advantage of the program and who has been helped and seen their children helped by this program. And that's why we see roughly half of the parents polled are either participating in the program or plan to. But even among those who don't, they're still supportive of the program. So that's what's really interesting here is that we're seeing broad-based support. It's not isolated to, one demographic or another or one political group or another. It's really across the board. And I think it's largely attributable. We went from a couple of years ago when it was first a concept to all sorts of theoretical debates, and a lot of people were stirring up misinformation about what this meant and saying it was only for the wealthy, which of course we know isn't true. And now parents are really benefiting from it, or they know someone who is, and so support has unsurprisingly jumped, and that's just great to see.
We also asked a handful of questions in the survey about this idea of starting to regulate or over-regulate, I would say, but the regulatory creep into the education freedom program. Certainly there's been an ongoing conversation and will continue to be about funding for the program. But then when you talk about what the expenses, or rather what the funding can be used for, and types of expenses that the public is comfortable with, there's this idea clearly in the media that, well, it shouldn't be used for athletics. Gosh, it shouldn't be used for piano lessons. Gosh, it can't be used on all of these expenses that, we just don't like, frankly. And then they try to convince people that that's fraudulent and that it's somehow improper. What did voters say? Because that is really, at the end of the day, what do the people of Arkansas think?
Right. And just for context, as you alluded to, we saw this popping up during the legislative session. There were some bills filed that would have completely rolled back the Education Freedom Account program. There were other bills filed that, as you noted, regulated it or restricted purchases or imposed, more stringent enrollment periods. Ultimately, thankfully, I think some of those got watered down before final passage. But the reality is there's, I think, three key takeaways. The first is 3 out of 4 parents in the poll support fully funding education freedom accounts for every single student in the state. So the universal nature of this program is widely supported by parents and voters alike. That's takeaway number one. Takeaway number two is that nearly 60% of voters think that per student funding for EFAs should either stay where it is or be increased. So voters aren't saying or thinking, hey, we want to pare back this funding, we think it's too expensive, or we don't like where the money's going. No, they're saying this is great, and if anything, we'd like to see more spent on this program. And then the last key takeaway on this point is, as you were alluding to, the different types of expenditures have created some controversy or some drama in the political dialogue, especially around, extracurricular activities or, therapy programs for students with learning disabilities or special needs. But the reality is that 2/3 of parents support allowing EFA participants to use funds for those types of extracurricular activities. So despite all the hype, despite all the drama, support for funding these programs and how the funding has been spent remains really strong.
Yeah, and that's not again, just to reiterate, 2 out of 3, like an overwhelming majority of parents and voters in Arkansas are in support of these things. And you won't get that story from the traditional media. You're not going to get that story really anywhere else other than this program and Opportunity Arkansas and the other groups that are working and fighting every single day to keep and protect universal education freedom. Hayden, one last question, and then we got to let you go because we've got a break here. But I know you do a lot of multi-state work as well, and so you have some perspective on just where Arkansas stands in this whole education freedom movement. What do you see out there? I've been telling listeners a lot today, and we talked about it in the last segment as well. Arkansas, in my perspective, really is at the top and the front lines of this fight. I think sometimes for us in-state, it's more difficult to realize that. But what do you see? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, with education freedom and education freedom accounts, it takes a couple states to act first, and then the dominoes start to fall in other states. And so that's kind of what we saw play out here. Arkansas was one of the earliest movers and one of the most significant in terms of the scale of its program. And now other states around the country are looking to Arkansas's lead. They're looking to Arkansas as a model state when it comes to this policy. And so I think that's not only been a really important takeaway for policymakers in those other states, but it should be really important for policymakers in Arkansas to consider. You know, Governor Sanders and the legislators who got this program created should be proud of the work that they've done. And I think what these poll results show and what other states emulating Arkansas's model demonstrate is that it's not time to roll back. It's time to reaffirm support for this program that's touching so many different lives all across the state and has widespread popularity.
Very well said, my friend. Thanks so much for making time. Hayden Dublois, Data and Analytics Director at Foundation for Government Accountability and a visiting economist at Opportunity Arkansas. Thank you so much for making time, and we'll talk soon.
Thanks, Nick. Appreciate it.
All right, Nick Horton, founder and CEO of Opportunity Arkansas, filling in for Steve Finnegan. We got to go to a quick break, and we'll be right back. Stick with us. .522 on Friday afternoon. Welcome back to the Steve Finnegan Show. Nick Horton filling in for Steve. Hey, we're going to get right back to it because we've got another guest on the line and so excited to welcome her in, Miss Emmy Henley, who is the managing director of the Reform Alliance. Emmy, are you there?
Hi, yes. Thank you for having me.
Hey, thanks so much for making time. I know y'all are super, super busy, especially with school starting back and fall and everything else that brings. But I wanted to have you on because, honestly, we're having a little bit of a celebration show here today to talk about education freedom and all of the work that has gone into getting us to this point where we're finally now, as of this school year, a truly universal education freedom state. Before we get to that, tell us a little bit about the Reform Alliance in case folks aren't familiar, who y'all are, what you do every day.
Yeah, absolutely. So we are a statewide nonprofit that advocates for all education options. So traditional public school, public charter, private, homeschool, whatever we think the parents can use for the best advantage for their children. We are also a scholarship granting organization for the tax credit scholarship in the state. And then we just go around informing parents of what their options are. So we have a team that travels statewide, and we just want to get the word out about all this.
Yeah, so my perception has been, and I think I even mentioned this earlier in the show, y'all are very hands-on. I mean, y'all aren't just, you're educating and advocating for more education options, but you're also at an individual level working with parents to make sure they understand what those options are, helping them enroll in options that are good for them. I mentioned where we are now, and we're finally fully all the way into universal education freedom. So what have you seen, what have you heard, and what are y'all hearing every day from parents about this program and about the fact that they're finally fully in charge of their kids' education?
Yeah, so like you said, I mean, we are hands-on with parents. I think everyone kind of has so much going on in their life with their kids and their work, and we're happy to be that middle person that can help them understand, what their options are, what's out there without them having to spend all day looking into it. You know, the applications, they don't know where those are maybe, or, just some basic things like charter schools are free. So a lot of what we're hearing is positive feedback, obviously. Parents know their children the best, they know what they need, and they're finally able to start accessing those options. In Arkansas, we have a lot of rural areas, and now they don't have to wait on a brick-and-mortar private school. If the traditional public school wasn't working for them, they can go out and homeschool their child and get funding for that, or they can go out and start a micro school in their community.
So you mentioned something there that I actually do want to dig into a little bit more. Micro school. I don't think, maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think most people know what a micro school is. And the more I've learned about them, the more exciting I think this whole concept is. Can you tell folks what a micro school is?
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing. So I think the easiest way to explain it is it's most closely related to a homeschool co-op. So it's just a small group of kids. They have a teacher. It can be a parent. It can be someone out, just from the community that wants to be the teacher. But it can look however it fits your community best. Do you guys want to meet 5 days a week? Do you want to meet 3 days a week? These are things that are customizable for each community so that it fits the needs there, and we're not forcing people into a certain expectation that we think it should look like.
So I know this is a growing trend because I'm hearing about it all the time in these micro schools, and they are eligible for the Education Freedom Program. Y'all are working with a lot of these folks, again, hands-on with a lot of these families across the state. What are you seeing out of the micro schools? Maybe a better question, one or two just personal stories, because I know y'all do a great job telling personal stories as well through your Faces of Freedom series on your website. What are some stories that come to mind of the positive impact that we've already started to see through this program?
Yeah, so I would say we started working with micro schools during the COVID-19 pandemic. We set up some across the state with Prenda out of Arizona. Now there are, more options and everything, but there is a couple in Jonesboro and Paragould that started because these moms saw the need for their students, and they have expanded so much. They are specifically for students that have special needs. They are much larger than they were 5 years ago. One has even converted into a private school. One has stayed a micro school, and then now they're offering those options where there were none in those communities for, that specific group of students.
It's so exciting to me as a parent and as someone who's been engaged in this fight for really a long time, even in my personal capacity, that we really are at a place now as a state where it really is what you said, early in the interview, Emmy. It's whatever's best for your kid. If it's a micro school, if it's a charter school, if it's a private school, if it's a homeschool, it doesn't matter. Whatever's best, every option is on the table. And it's crazy to think we're only 4 weeks into this. So I think we're really just truly only starting to see what's going to happen and the positive outcomes from this. But I want to make sure before I forget, before we run out of time, where can folks go? Because we get this question all the time at Opportunity Arkansas. There are so many options that it can almost be overwhelming, but y'all do a really great job, again, of being hands-on and helping families navigate all of that. So if someone's listening and they're not sure if their kid's in the right education setting, but they want to learn more, how can they get in touch with you and your organization?
Yes, so our website, thereformalliance.org. And then you can reach out to us from our contact page, or we have, like I said, a team that travels statewide. You can contact them directly if they're in your area, and they can help you. I mean, we can meet, we can do a Zoom, we can do a call. We will do whatever it takes to make sure that parents know their options and then can select from there for their kids.
That's awesome. So that's reformalliance.org if you want to learn more. And even if you just want to explore and just have a conversation. I know Emmy and her team are so great, so responsive, and they'd be happy to get on the phone with you and share more about what your options are for your kid. Emmy, the music means we're out of time. I'm sorry. It flies.
No, that's
but
okay.
Thank you so much.
So much.
Yeah, thank you for making time. Nick Horton filling in for Steve Finnegan. That's thereformalliance.org if you want to learn more. Stick around. We got 1/2 hour left. We'll be back. We're back on the Steve Finnegan Show. Once again, Nick Horton, founder and CEO of Opportunity Arkansas, filling in for Steve. Steve, thanks again for the opportunity. This is always a lot of fun. And, yeah, I just really enjoy being in this chair. It's a lot of work. I mean, you guys... Steve makes it look so easy. Y'all have no idea how much work it is back here. You got to push all these buttons and put your headphones on. You got to read text messages. I mean, it's pretty intense. Speaking of text messages, we've had several come in, and I'm always astonished and impressed, frankly, with how many texts we get. Quality text, not just like the, hey, would you like to save 25% on your mortgage insurance, but like actual listeners. So I want to be sure we get to a couple of these. This is from 2579 number. He said, 2 years ago, my daughter was bullied and brutally beat down at her school. So naturally, she refused to go back. Even with weekly counseling, we could not convince her to return. Realistically, we could not afford private schooling. Education Freedom gave us a lifeline that allows her to get a good education. An accredited online education program for homeschool students. She's never been happier. It's been a game changer for the entire family, this listener says. That is, as I told them in my response, heartbreaking and yet also so inspiring. Because this is what's happening now in every corner of our state. And I don't care. I don't care if I do sound like a broken record. We're going to talk about this issue probably for the next decade or more at Opportunity Arkansas. Because it's that important. Because of stories like this. Where you had kids who were scared to go to school. You had kids who hated school. For whatever reason. And by the way, that's not an anti-public school comment. It's just reality. And it would be foolish for us to assume or to think that public schools are the right choice for every child, because they're clearly not. And by the way, it would also be incredibly arrogant. Because who are you to decide for my kids or my nieces and nephews or our neighbors down the street? You don't get to decide. You don't know my kids. And there's now 50,000 kids across the state of Arkansas that are participating in this program. And we at Opportunity Arkansas, if you go to our website, opportunityarkansas.org, we're talking to these families on almost a daily basis now because there's so many of them. There's tens of thousands of them. And they are telling us these stories about the transformation that they are seeing in their kids. And not just academically, although that is happening too. But in their confidence, in their demeanor. They're making friends and building relationships that they didn't have before. I mean, my kids are in that age range now. And I know what that means in a new way as a parent. And if you're a parent listening, you know what it means too. But these are super critical formative years. And for so long in this state, we have just discarded kids and said, well, I'm sorry. I'm sorry you can't get help getting out of that school district. I'm sorry you don't have the resources to get out of that school district. And to Robert Enlow's point earlier, this idea that, well, they were already in a private school. Who cares? Who cares? If they're in a private school, that means they're paying twice, by the way, for their kids' education. And that's what my parents did. That's what my dad did for decades. He paid twice. He paid his taxes and his property taxes and his state taxes and federal taxes to feed into the education system, and he got no benefit from that. Our family got no benefit from that. Because we were homeschooled and then eventually went on to private school in high school. And so we got to pay twice. We got to pay for everyone else's education and our education. And we got no resources to do that. And how is that fair? How is that just? How is that American? It's not. It's the opposite. It's redistribution is what it is. We got another very heartwarming text here from Cheryl in Hot Springs Village. She said, Nick, thank you for having Mr. Enlow as one of your guests today. You and he have restored my faith. I nearly turned the radio off. My son, a 2015 graduate, hated school. He begged me to change him to another district, but I was a single mom and would have had to transport him. Really happy to learn of these positive changes in Arkansas. And thank you, Cheryl, for taking the time to share that. For you and for so many others that are listening, this is why we do this work, and this is why I personally care so much about this issue, because there are thousands of stories like that from generations gone by that never got the help that they needed. And I will say a bit of a shameless plug, but we are telling these stories every single day. And if you have a story like that, even if it doesn't have a happy ending, or if it does, if you're a family now that is experiencing the power of education freedom and you want to tell that story, or if your story is more like Cheryl's, where you say, "Hey, gosh, this was brutal." I mean, that's my story. Again, I just mentioned a dad who worked two and a half jobs most of my life to be able to put us through a quality school, and had to really, really, really sacrifice. Really sacrifice. We all did. But if you have a story like that, we would love to tell it. You can go to our website, opportunityarkansas.org, and go to our contact page, and we'll reach out someone on our team almost immediately, and we would love to tell that story, because so many times, and we know this from working in the public policy space every day, these become sort of faceless problems. Politicians and policymakers love to talk about data and spreadsheets and statistics, and those are important things, don't get me wrong. But behind every spreadsheet, there's a person. Behind every policy decision, there's a person. And so from day one of our organization, when we launched 3 years ago, we have focused on telling stories of real Arkansans. And by the way, not just on education freedom. If you have a story of building a small business and all the ways the government has tried to keep you and kick you down along the way, we'd love to tell that story as well. If you have experienced all of the burden that comes with government dependency, long-term generational government dependency, we'd love to tell that story as well. We want to bring these problems to the surface so that we can drive real change in our state. And while you're there as well, if you want to go to opportunityarkansas.org and sign up for our email list, you can do it right at the top of the homepage. There's a subscribe button. We send out fairly regular emails. We send out these stories. We also have an insider newsletter that we send to let you know what's happening at the state capitol every day. All sorts of really good stuff you're going to get in your inbox. And frankly, it's just stuff you're not going to get anywhere else. Not in Arkansas. Because we're doing stuff and finding stuff and telling stories that you're just not going to get anywhere else. So we'd love for you to be a part of it. Because that's what we're all about. Nick Horton, founder and CEO of Opportunity Arkansas, filling in for Steve on the Steve Finnegan Show. One last break before we call it a day. Hang with us. One segment left. There we go. I know I hit the right button. I'm telling you, folks, Steve makes this look easy. He really does. But just one segment left on the Steve Finnegan Show. Nick Horton of Opportunity, Arkansas, filling in for Steve. We have Miss Carolyn on the line, and she's been patiently waiting. I want to be sure we get her in. Carolyn from Valonia, thank you for waiting. How are you? What's on your mind?
I'm fine. I learned how to handle bullies at school a long time ago. And the way you handle it at school is you take your statement to the police department and actually file a police report, even if they have a resource officer, which they had at one school where one of my grandchildren were. And the principal tried to explain to me that's not how they do it. You have to report to the resource advisor. And I said, I don't have to do crap. Unless this girl is on 3 days suspension, effective immediately, I'll just go downstairs or go down to the police department and file a police report for assault. I have pictures of a bloody leg, and that is assault. So the girl got suspended for 3 days. If you mess around, the resource officers don't even make reports. They're just like, oh, everybody calm down, be cool. And that's why bullying has become as bad as it is. And I know of at least 3 instances where the bullies were the children of politicians or somebody with a lot of money that donates to the school. Take all of that out by filing a police report downtown. And when they know you're going to do that and you tell other people to do that, suddenly bullies kind of, I don't know if I ought to hit this person, you know. Anyway, I thought I would just pass that wisdom along because it worked at least 3 times to get some bullies suspended for 3 days.
Well, I appreciate it, and I appreciate so much the call, Carolyn from Valonia. Thank you for waiting patiently and sharing that with us. And honestly, I'm glad you brought this up because for me, I mean, I hear these stories all the time. And I think we at some point you're going to hear more about Opportunity Arkansas from us about this in the coming weeks and months. I'll just tell you. But school safety in the state of Arkansas is a serious problem. And I'm going to tell you, it's primarily a problem in the public schools. And it's happening all across the state of Arkansas. And a lot of this, frankly, for me, it goes back to what we talked about in the first hour with Robert Enlow. There's no accountability. When we've had a system for so long that, well, you know, hey, I'm sorry your child is getting beat up on the bus. Oh, hey, you know, I'm sorry your child is getting bullied. Well, hey, I'm sorry about that. But the administration can just move on. Because where else are you going to go? Where else are you going to take your child? Especially if you're a low-income family in the state of Arkansas. Especially if you're in a rural community and you're low income and you don't have any other schools close by. The schools are not responsive to you as a parent. They have no reason to be. They have no incentive to respond to you if your child is being bullied or feels like their safety is being threatened or whatever the issue may be. Because you're trapped. And they know you're trapped. And you know you're trapped. And that's the system that we've had for far too long in the state of Arkansas. Thank God we don't have that system anymore. But let's just be honest about what this is, what this has been. Public schools have had no incentive to fix those types of issues. In many cases. Now, I'm speaking broadly here, but in many cases, that is the fact. That is the truth. And so, honestly, I'm not sure I've ever really thought of it this way. But having true education freedom is going to help with that, too. Because if you're not getting the responsiveness that you deserve from your school and your public school and your superintendent, guess what? You can vote with your feet. You can go somewhere else. And that public school, if they want to if they want to stay around and stay in business, they're going to figure that out. They're going to have to be responsive to you and your family and your kids now. And that's across the board. That's with academics, it's with safety, it's with athletics, whatever it is. Whatever you as a parent want for your kid, there's a level playing field now. There's real competition now. I used the car dealership analogy earlier. It's not the best one. I got a texter giving me a hard time about the used car trade-in. But pick your analogy. Anywhere in the private sector, anywhere in the free market, in the real world, outside of government and outside of public schools, and maybe hospitals and healthcare, if you don't like what you're getting, you can go somewhere else. Well, what happens if you can't do that? If McDonald's or whatever, pick your favorite fast food restaurant, if they're the only one in your town, they can kind of decide whether or not they want to really serve quality meals or not, because they're the only show in town. And if you don't have anywhere else to go, there is no reason for them to get better. And that is the beauty of the system that we live in our economy. That's the beauty of free market capitalism. Because the minute a new fast food joint opens up in town, guess what? The old one just got better. Because they have to. Because you'll vote with your feet and you'll go to the new place. And they've got to respond to that. And I think we're only beginning to see that reality come to our education system. So it's really, truly exciting. We're out of time. I don't know where the time goes. But it's been a pleasure to be with you this week. I hope to be back soon. I hope Steve will have me back. You can learn more at opportunityarkansas.org. Nick Horton, signing off, The Steve Finnegan Show.